I see way too many students wasting their time by having a bad plan to approach the ACT. So I'm making this video so that you can have a better way to improve your ACT score without wasting your time, without burning out, and without dragging the process on for longer than you need to. And why should you care what I have to say? Well, over the last 6 years, I've coached thousands of students to some pretty incredible outcomes on the ACT, and I've seen all of the common mistakes that are out there in terms of ACT prep. And now my goal is to make free guides just like this one on how you can avoid all the common mistakes that I've seen. I obviously can't work with everybody in my personalized coaching program, so this is the way that I can get this information out to as many people as possible. And obviously there are a ton of mistakes that I see people making all the time, but one of the biggest ones is not knowing how long they need to be preparing for the ACT for. Some people on one hand think that you can just hire a tutor or enroll in some course for like a week or two, learn some of the quick tips and strategies, and all of a sudden get a better score. And then on the other hand, some people want to start preparing for this test over a year in advance because they think that that's going to get them the best outcome. And the thing is, if you don't pick the right path with how long you're going to prepare for, then you're going to leave a lot of ACT points on the table. And that means that you're not going to get into the best colleges that you're capable of getting into. And you're also leaving a ton of free scholarship dollars on the table. So with all that said, here's what I've seen work really well and what I've seen work not really well in terms of the amount of time you should be spending preparing for this ACT. So if you want a good, thorough preparation that gets you the highest ACT score possible, then 1 or 2 weeks is just simply not enough time. While it is possible to get maybe a couple quick wins by tweaking some strategy and just making some small changes overall, 2 weeks is just not enough time to actually truly ingrain the learning process. And that means that you're not going to make any real significant improvement. Personally, the shortest timeline for any significant, like real improvement, which I would consider to be, 3 or 4 points at least, is about 4 weeks of preparation heading into a test. Again, any shorter than that, you might be able to squeeze out a point or two here or there, but I personally wouldn't be too confident in any preparation process that's only a week or two long. And then on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, I've seen many families think that you need to drag this process on for an entire year. If you're being efficient with your learning, then there's simply no reason to drag this thing on for a full year. And even though it's a little bit counterintuitive, a longer process like that can actually be holding you back a little bit. The first problem with a year-long preparation, or even like a 6-month-long preparation, is that you're gonna forget a lot of the stuff that you learned early on in the process. How many times can you remember something that you learned an entire year ago? Probably not too often. And that's what I see sometimes happen when we drag out this process for over 6 months. And the second big problem that I see happening is that students just get burned out. There's no high school student that I've seen really enthusiastically going after ACT prep for longer than 6 months. So what happens is you may see some good improvement at the beginning and the students encouraged and all that stuff, but by the time that they're 3, 4, 5, 6 months into this process, they're ready to be done and they're looking for the finish line. And if they don't see that finish line nearby, then they're gonna get burned out and they're gonna slowly start moving backwards in terms of their knowledge. Now, unfortunately, I have seen some instructors recommend a process that drags on forever and ever because that's how some of these instructors can get paid for longer. So this is a big red flag to look out for if you're talking to a tutor or an instructor who wants to drag out this process for 6 months or longer than that. In my personal experience, again, working with thousands of high school students over the last few years, I've seen that a shorter process where we can be dedicated and focused to our preparation ends up working a lot better. And what that typically looks like is somewhere between 4 and 8 weeks leading into one test. And then typically we'll try and do this over the course of 2 different ACTs. And a good time commitment for this 4 to 8 weeks is about an hour a day, or more realistically, what I say is about 7 hours a week on average. This makes it way more manageable overall for a high school student who doesn't want to drag this thing on forever, who wants to see a finish line in front of them, while also not having to dedicate 3 or 4 hours a day to their ACT preparation. And the way that we can do this so efficiently is by narrowing our focus to just 2 sections of the test each time that we take the ACT. And this makes it so that we're not spreading ourselves really thin by trying to study for all 4 sections of the test at the same time. Because what happens there is a lot of times you'll take 1 or 2 steps forward in one section of the test, and then by the time you study that 3rd or 4th section, you're making 1 or 2 steps forward there, but you're forgetting a lot of the knowledge that you may have learned on that first section of the test a few weeks ago. When we just spend 1 or 2 months completely dedicating ourselves to 2 sections of the test, we're able to make really significant improvements in those 2 sections of the test, and then we focus on the other 2 sections of the test for the next 1 or 2 months going into that second test, and we can combine all of those scores together with super scoring in order to get the best overall composite score. And most of the time what I find is that on that second test, that second time that we take the ACT, we don't even really need to use those super scores from that first test because that learning has been ingrained so thoroughly in the student's brain that they actually can carry that over to the second test, even though we weren't necessarily focusing that much on those two sections going into that second test. For example, one of my students named Robert, we planned to approach 2 different ACTs, only focusing on 2 sections at a time, and then again, focusing on the other 2 sections for that second test. And he actually moved up from a 21 to a 24 on that first time he took it. But then overall, the second time he took the test, he moved from a 24 up to a 29, and he didn't even need any of those scores from his first test. And it was the same thing with Nick, another student that we took this exact same approach with. He started with a 24 and he moved up a decent bit after the first time he took the test, but then the second time he took the test, he actually ended up getting a 31, and all of those scores to make up that 31 came from that second test. Again, even though we had put 2 of the sections entirely behind us, he still had that learning and all that knowledge from the first 2 sections ingrained in his mind, so he did better on all 4 sections of the test the second time that he took it. Now, of course, what you need to do is look at your specific situation and figure out a timeline and a preparation process that works best for you. That's why I leave some wiggle room in here for somewhere between 4 and 8 weeks, depending on how intense of a preparation process you want to take. If you're going to try and do 4 weeks, you're probably going to want to be a little bit more than that, 7 hours a week. But if you're going for 8 weeks, then maybe a little bit, even sometimes less than that 1 hour a day, or a little bit less than that 7 hours a week might be okay for your situation. Again, there's no cookie cutter approach that you can say works best for everybody. For example, another student of mine named Ava, she was about to get really busy with a lot of her extracurriculars and sports and other time commitments, and she only had a 6-week window where she would have to go all in on her ACT prep. She wasn't going to be able to do a super scoring approach, and she wasn't going to be able to do any prep beyond those 6 weeks. And so what we did is we created a program that was right for Ava's situation, and that involved a little bit more than just the typical 7 hours per week. We ended up crafting a process where she was going to commit more than 10 hours a week to her ACT prep, and she was going to do this all just in the course of 6 weeks and put the test behind her so that she would never have to worry about it again. And it all paid off in Ava's situation when she took her score from a 22 up to a 30 and earned almost $90,000 in scholarships because of it. And after that 6 weeks, again, she never worried about the ACT ever again. So those are all the things that you're going to need to think about when you're planning out your timelines and how long you need to dedicate to your ACT studying. Now, if you want to see a full breakdown of Ava's situation and how exactly she took her score from a 22 all the way up to a 30, then check out the link in the description below. I did a full case study breakdown on Ava's situation. So if you're interested in seeing how maybe you could get a similar score improvement, then check that out by clicking the link in the description down below. Other than that, stay tuned for more ACT guides right here on YouTube and over on Instagram, and I'll see you in the next one.